17 minutes. That's all the time they gave themselves to regret it. They grabbed the wrong kids, on the wrong station, wearing the wrong flag. And they thought a countdown clock would make Earth panic. It didn't. It made Earth move. What started as a hostage stunt broadcast to a dozen worlds ended with an entire faction on its knees, begging for mercy nobody was in a rush to give. This is the story of the 17 minutes that taught the galaxy exactly what happens when you touch human kids. The Korath Freehold never planned to start a war with a school trip. But that's exactly what happened the moment their raiders boarded Meridian Station and grabbed 19 human kids straight out of the observation deck. The kids, part of an interplanetary youth exchange program from Ashford Prep, had been on Meridian for a routine tours when the station's docking clamps locked without warning, and Korath boarding pods slammed into 3 separate airlocks. Within 4 minutes, armed raiders had cleared the observation deck, zip-tied every kid in sight, and hauled them into a sealed cargo bay while station security, badly outgunned, could do nothing but watch. Commander Uric Thane, the Korath officer leading the raid, had planned this for months. His faction had been locked out of 3 lucrative trade routes after a coalition ruling favored human shipping interests, and Thane wanted leverage, something big enough to force a reversal. Human children, he'd calculated, would be exactly that kind of leverage. Humans, in every intelligence report he'd read, were sentimental about their young, in a way most species found almost embarrassing. He broadcast his demands within the hour, beaming the feed to every coalition relay in range. Behind him, the kids sat huddled together on the cargo bay floor, scared but eerily quiet, the way kids get when the danger in front of them is real enough that even the bravest ones stop talking. 19 human children, Thane announced, chest puffed with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. You have 17 minutes to agree to reverse the trade ruling, or we begin executions. 17 minutes, starting now. He expected panic. He expected Earth's ambassadors to scramble, expected pleading messages, expected the kind of frantic, emotional response every intelligence briefing had promised him. What he got instead was silence. Dead. Total silence from every human channel. The same eerie quiet that had once made an entire terrorist faction underestimate humanity before, though Thane had no idea that particular history existed. He didn't know he was about to relearn a lesson the galaxy had already been taught once and apparently forgotten, somewhere far outside Meridian Station's sensor range. A fleet that hadn't officially existed an hour earlier was already moving, running dark, running fast, and running directly toward the countdown clock. Thane had just started without knowing exactly what he'd triggered. He had no reason to know. No public record connected humanity to any standing rapid response force built specifically for hostage scenarios involving civilians. That was by design. Every intelligence briefing Thane had studied described a species that reacted, that scrambled, that negotiated under pressure. Nothing in those files described a species that had spent years quietly preparing for this exact moment, waiting, patient as stone, for someone arrogant enough to finally test it. At Earth Fleet Command, a woman named Vice Admiral Carla Diallo watched Thane's broadcast in real time, her expression giving away absolutely nothing. 17 minutes, she repeated, mostly to herself. Beside her, a junior officer looked ready to panic, fingers already moving toward the emergency channel to draft a response message. Ma'am, should we open a line to negotiate? Buy time? Diallo shook her head slowly. Negotiating tells him his clock matters. It doesn't. She tapped a comm switch. Get me the Talon Group. Tell them the window's open. The Talon Group wasn't listed in any coalition military registry, wasn't acknowledged in any public defense budget, and existed as far as most of the galaxy knew, purely as rumor. Built quietly over a decade specifically for scenarios exactly like this one, hostile factions holding human civilians as leverage, the Talon Group had one job and one job only. Make sure that leverage never worked. Commander Jake Reyna, call sign Talon 1, received the activation order less than 90 seconds after Thane's broadcast finished. His team had been staged in a stealth carrier drifting silently 400 kilometers off Meridian Station for the past 6 hours, on standby the moment intelligence flagged unusual Korath fleet movement near the trade corridor. Clock's running, Reyna told his team, voice calm as ever. 17 minutes on his watch. 12 on ours, because we don't cut it close. His team? 8 operators total, geared up in under 2 minutes, moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from years of drilling this exact nightmare scenario. until it stopped feeling like a nightmare and started feeling like Tuesday. Back on Meridian Station, Thane paced in front of his hostages, checking the countdown timer obsessively, waiting for Earth to blink. Every minute of silence made him more confident, not less. In his mind, silence meant fear. And fear meant they'd fold before the clock ran out. He had no idea that somewhere beyond his sensors, a stealth carrier had already launched, cutting through open space at a speed his outdated scanning arrays weren't built to detect, carrying 8 operators who had absolutely zero intention of letting his countdown reach 0. The kids on that cargo bay floor didn't know help was coming either. But 19-year-old counselor Marissa Vance, the exchange program's chaperone, kept whispering the same thing to the younger kids beside her, over and over, low enough that only they could hear it. Just hold on. Just hold on a little longer. 8 minutes into the countdown, Thane started to notice something was wrong, though he couldn't quite place what. His comm officer, a nervous Korath tech named Bell, kept losing signal on 2 of the station's external sensor arrays, static bleeding through the feed at irregular intervals. Bell blamed old station hardware, chalked it up to Meridian's outdated infrastructure, and moved on, not realizing that human signal engineers had already slipped into the station's network 40 minutes earlier, quietly blinding exactly the sensor arrays that mattered most. Thane checked the countdown again. 9 minutes left. Still no response from Earth. They're really going to let this play out, Bell said, sounding nervous for the first time since the raid began. No response at all, not even a delay tactic. They're scared, Thane said, though even he was starting to sound less certain than he had an hour ago. They're deciding how to save face before they cave. What he didn't know, what his intelligence reports had completely failed to account for, was that humanity had spent years building a very specific playbook for exactly this kind of hostage scenario, refined and rehearsed after Kepler Relay and half a dozen incidents since. Incidents that never made coalition news precisely because they'd all ended before anyone outside a small circle even knew they'd happened. Silence wasn't fear. Silence was doctrine. Inside the cargo bay, the kids sat pressed together, exhausted and terrified but holding steady, largely thanks to Marissa's quiet, constant reassurance. A younger boy named Dylan, maybe 11, kept glancing at the ceiling vents, an odd habit that Marissa noticed but didn't understand until she caught the faintest flicker of movement behind the grating, gone before she could be sure she'd seen it at all. Raina's team was already inside the station, moving through service corridors that hadn't appeared on any schematic the Korath boarding party had access to, because those corridors, like Kepler Relay's maintenance shafts years earlier, existed in a version of the blueprints humanity had quietly kept for itself. Talon 3, a soft-spoken operator named Priya Malhotra, paused above the cargo bay's ceiling vent just long enough to catch Dylan's eye through the grating and press one gloved finger to her lips. Dylan understood immediately and looked away, his small shoulders relaxing just slightly for the first time in nearly an hour, holding on to a secret that was about to change absolutely everything. 12 minutes into the countdown, Thane's confidence cracked for the first time. His secondary comm array went fully dark, no static this time, just silence. And when Bell tried rerouting through backup channels, those failed too, one after another, like something was systematically peeling away his ability to see or communicate beyond the cargo bay itself. Systems check now, Thane snapped. Bell's hands moved fast across the console, sweat visible along his brow ridge. I don't understand it, sir. It's like something's cutting us off from the outside piece by piece. Surgical. Not random. Not random at all. Talon 2 and Talon 4 had spent the last 10 minutes doing exactly that, moving through the station's technical infrastructure with the same precision Raina's team applied to everything, isolating the cargo bay, cutting off Thane's raiders from reinforcements, from communication, from any chance of calling in backup from whatever Korath ships waited beyond the station. Raina's voice came through every operator's earpiece at the 12-minute mark. Talon team converging. 2 minutes to position. Inside the cargo bay, Thane grabbed one of the older kids by the collar, a 15-year-old boy named Marcus who'd spent the last hour trying to keep the younger kids calm despite his own fear. Maybe this will make them talk, Thane growled, dragging Marcus toward the center of the room, in full view of the camera still broadcasting the countdown to every coalition relay watching. That single move was the last mistake Thane would ever get to make as a free man. The moment his hand closed around Marcus's collar, 4 different things happened within the same 3 seconds. The cargo bay's overhead lights cut to emergency red. The main door blew inward on a controlled charge that dropped 2 raiders before they even registered the sound. Priya Malhotra dropped through the ceiling vent directly above Thane, weapon already tracking. And Reyna came through the blown door at a dead sprint, closing the distance before Thane's own weapon cleared its holster. "Let him go," Reyna said, voice flat, weapon leveled. Thane froze, staring at 8 operators who had appeared from absolutely nowhere, moving like they'd rehearsed this exact scenario 100 times. Because they had the countdown clock behind him, still ticking, showed 4 minutes and 31 seconds remaining. It would never reach 0. Around the room, the remaining raiders stood frozen, weapons half raised, but going nowhere, outnumbered and outmaneuvered in a matter of seconds by operators who hadn't even bothered raising their voices. One of them, a younger Korath fighter barely out of training, actually lowered his weapon on his own, hands trembling, deciding on the spot that whatever loyalty he owed Thane wasn't worth what was clearly about to happen next. Thane's hand tightened on Marcus's collar for one more heartbeat, some last desperate instinct telling him a hostage was still a hostage no matter how badly the odds had shifted. "Back off," he snarled, dragging Marcus in front of him like a shield. One more step and the boy dies. Reyna didn't move, didn't blink, didn't lower his weapon. You've got about 3 seconds to think real hard about how that sentence ends for you. Behind Thane, Priya Malhotra, still perched near the ceiling vent, had a clean angle nobody in the room but her knew existed. She didn't need 3 seconds. She took less than 1. A single precise shot that dropped the raider standing closest to the door before he could even raise his own weapon toward the operators, now flooding the cargo bay. The sound of that shot broke whatever nerve Thane had left. His grip on Marcus loosened just enough for the boy to twist free and drop to the floor, scrambling toward the other kids while Talon 5 swept in to shield him. "Stand down," Reyna said again. Closer now. Close enough that Thane could see there was no bluff behind those words, no hesitation, nothing to negotiate with. "This ends one of 2 ways. You put the weapon down, or we put you down. Either way, this room clears in the next 90 seconds. For a long moment, Thane genuinely considered his odds, doing the kind of fast, ugly math-desperate men do when they realize the ground has completely shifted beneath them. 8 operators. His own remaining raiders down to 3, all disarmed within seconds of the breach. 19 kids who would be walking out of here regardless of what he decided next. He dropped his weapon. Sipe ties went on fast, efficient, no wasted motion. The same practiced calm the Talon group brought to everything they did. Within 90 seconds of the breach, every raider in the cargo bay was cuffed, disarmed, and accounted for, and every single kid was on their feet, shaken but unharmed, being guided toward the door by operators who suddenly seemed a lot less intimidating now that their weapons were lowered. Marissa Vance, still holding Dylan's hand tight, looked up at Reyna as he passed. "You knew," she said quietly. "You knew this whole time, didn't you?" Reyna allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "Ma'am, we knew before he finished his first sentence." Word of the failed hostage operation reached Korath Freehold leadership within the hour, and the reaction wasn't outrage on Thane's behalf. It was panic. High Marshal Vec Orson, the Freehold's senior military commander, had approved Thane's operation reluctantly, more out of political pressure from trade-hungry council members than genuine confidence in the plan. He'd expected, at worst, an awkward diplomatic standoff followed by tense negotiations. What he got instead was footage, already circulating across a dozen coalition networks, of 8 unmarked human operators clearing a cargo bay in under 2 minutes flat, disarming an entire raiding party without a single hostage getting hurt. That footage alone would have been damaging enough. What came next made it catastrophic. Within 6 hours of Thane's capture, 3 Korath trade convoys operating just outside coalition-monitored space went dark simultaneously, their cargo manifests, encrypted communications, and financial routing all seized without a shot fired, human cyber units moving with the same surgical precision the Talon group had shown aboard Meridian Station. 2 more Korath-flagged vessels found themselves denied docking rights at every major coalition trade hub within 12 hours, human-backed sanctions moving through council channels faster than any diplomatic action Orson had ever witnessed. "They didn't send a fleet," Orson said to his advisors, staring at reports flooding in from every direction. "They didn't declare war. They just turned everything off. His economic advisor, a nervous Korath bureaucrat named Fessa Draln, looked paler than Orson had ever seen her. Marshall, at this rate, we lose access to 11 trade corridors within the week. Our shipping partners are already pulling contracts. Nobody wants to be caught doing business with the faction that grabbed human children. Orson understood with sinking clarity exactly what humanity had just demonstrated to the entire galaxy. This hadn't been a rescue operation. It had been a message, delivered with brutal efficiency, that touching human civilians came with consequences that extended far beyond the moment of the crime, consequences that could dismantle an entire faction's economic lifeline within hours without a single declared act of war. "Get me a channel to the Coalition Council," Orson said quietly. "We need to talk. Now." Fessa hesitated. "Marshall, humanity hasn't opened negotiations. There's been no formal contact from them at all." Orson's expression hardened. "That's exactly the problem." He stared out the viewport of his command office at the distant lights of Korath shipping lanes. Lanes that had, until yesterday, hummed with steady traffic. Now half of them sat empty, contracts pulled, partners scattering, all because one commander had decided human children made good leverage. Orson understood now, far too late to matter, that leverage only worked against people who feared losing something. Humanity, it turned out, feared nothing quite so little as an empty threat. The Coalition Council convened an emergency session less than a day after Thane's capture. And for the first time in recent memory, every delegate in the chamber wanted the same thing: to understand exactly what humanity had just done, and how fast they'd done it. Vice Admiral Carla Diallo represented Earth at the session, calm and composed as always, giving away nothing beyond what was strictly necessary. When pressed by a Jean delegate about the scope of the economic response against the Korath freehold, her answer was short. "When someone puts hands on our kids, we don't send a strongly worded letter," she said. "We remove their ability to do it again." A ripple moved through the chamber, delegates exchanging uneasy glances. The scale of the response had genuinely stunned people. Not because it was excessive. Most agreed the Korath freehold had it coming, but because of how fast and how quietly it had all happened. 17 minutes from broadcast to breach, 6 hours from breach to a faction's entire trade network in ruins. No declared war. No fleet massing at Korath borders. Just a single devastating demonstration that human retaliation didn't wait for permission and didn't need to be loud to be absolute. High Marshal Vec Orson himself requested to address the council, a highly unusual move for a faction leader whose forces had just been humiliated on galactic television. He stood before the chamber, visibly exhausted, and did something few had expected from a man of his reputation. He apologized. "Commander Thane acted under my authority," Orson admitted, voice carrying none of its usual bravado. "The operation was a catastrophic misjudgment. I take full responsibility, and I formally request the Council's assistance in de-escalating tensions with the human delegation before further economic measures cripple my people entirely." Diallo listened to the entire statement without interrupting, without visible reaction, and when it finished, gave her response in the same flat, even tone she'd used throughout the session. "Return the hostages' belongings seized during the raid. Issue a formal public apology to the families involved. Compensate Meridian Station for damages. Do that, and we'll discuss easing the trade restrictions." Orson agreed, almost instantly, without a single counteroffer, without a single attempt at negotiation, because everyone in that chamber understood, with total clarity now, exactly what kind of mistake it would be to test humanity's patience twice. The session closed without a single raised voice, without a single threat exchanged, which somehow made the entire exchange feel more unsettling than a shouting match ever could have. Delegates filed out of the chamber in near silence, several of them already drafting quiet internal memos, reminding their own security forces, in no uncertain terms, that human civilians were to be treated as strictly off-limits, regardless of politics, regardless of leverage, regardless of how good the plan looked on paper. The 19 kids from Ashford Prep returned to Earth 6 days later, greeted at the spaceport by tearful families, news cameras, and a level of media attention none of them had remotely expected when they signed up for what was supposed to be a simple 2-week exchange trip. Marcus, the 15-year-old who'd been dragged in front of the camera during the standoff's final minute, gave one interview and one interview only, calm and measured beyond his years. "I wasn't scared once they showed up," he said, referring to the Talon group. I mean, I was terrified before that. But the second those doors blew open, I just knew it was over. You could feel it in the room. Dylan, the 11-year-old who'd spotted movement in the ceiling vent before anyone else, became something of a minor celebrity among his classmates, retelling the story with growing embellishment every time, though the core details never changed. He saw them coming, and he knew, somehow, that everything was about to be okay. Marissa Vance, the young chaperone who'd kept 19 scared kids calm through the worst hour of her life, received a personal commendation from Earth Fleet Command, though she insisted, in every interview, that she hadn't done anything special. "I just told them to hold on," she said. Turns out that's all they needed to hear. Commander Jake Reyna and the rest of the Talon group never gave a singles interview, never appeared on a single broadcast, vanished back into the same shadows they'd emerged from before anyone could even get a clear photograph of their faces. That was always the arrangement. No credit, no recognition, just the job, done quietly and completely, over and over, for exactly as long as it needed doing. Vice Admiral Carla Diallo gave one final statement to the press before the story finally started to fade from the headlines. The same calm, measured tone she'd carried through the entire crisis. 19 kids went on a school trip, she said. They came home safe. That's the whole story, as far as we're concerned. Everything else was just cleanup. It was, of course, far more than cleanup to everyone who'd watched it unfold. But that single, understated line ended up quoted across a dozen coalition worlds anyway, becoming something close to legend among species who were, for the first time, starting to genuinely understand exactly what humanity meant when they said they didn't negotiate. In the months that followed, something shifted quietly across coalition space. A change nobody could point to on any single day, but that everyone eventually noticed: hostage-taking against human targets, once a rare but not unheard of tactic among smaller factions looking for leverage, all but disappeared. Intelligence analysts across a dozen worlds pored over the Meridian Station incident, trying to understand exactly how humanity had assembled and deployed a rescue force within minutes of a threat that, on paper, should have taken hours to even coordinate a response to. They never got a satisfying answer. The Talon Group's existence remained officially unconfirmed, its operational details buried deep enough that even allied coalition intelligence services couldn't pin down concrete specifics. All anyone really knew was the outcome: touch human civilians, and consequences arrived faster and harder than anything else in known space. Consequences that didn't require a declared war, didn't wait for council approval, and didn't stop until the threat was fully neutralized. The Korath Freehold spent the better part of a year rebuilding its trade relationships, most of them only restored after lengthy public apologies and, in several cases, direct compensation to the families affected by Thane's raid. Thane himself stood trial before a joint tribunal, the footage from Meridian Station serving as damning, undeniable evidence against him. He never got the chance to explain his reasoning to anyone who cared to hear it, because by the time his trial concluded, almost nobody outside his own faction remembered his name at all. History, as it turned out, was a lot more interested in the 17 minutes than the man who'd started the clock. Other factions took notes, quietly adjusting their own doctrines, their own contingency plans, their own understanding of exactly where the line sat with humanity and what happened to anyone who crossed it. Diplomatic briefings across a dozen worlds started including a new, informal section, something station commanders and fleet officers alike began referring to simply as the Meridian Clause. Never, under any circumstances, put your hands on a human kid. It wasn't written into any formal coalition law. It didn't need to be. Everyone who'd watched those 17 minutes play out already understood the rule perfectly. No legislation required. Even species with no direct dealings with humanity found themselves adjusting old assumptions, passing the story along in briefings and bar conversations alike, until Meridian stopped being a station's name and started becoming shorthand for a very specific kind of mistake, the kind nobody wanted to be the next cautionary tale for making. A year after Meridian Station, Vice Admiral Carla Diallo stood before a graduating class of new fleet officers, delivering a speech that would later be quoted far beyond the small auditorium it was given in. "You'll hear people call what happened at Meridian a rescue," she told the room. It was that, but it was something else too. It was a promise, kept in real time, in front of the whole galaxy. We promised, a long time ago, that our people would never again wonder whether help was coming. 17 minutes proved that promise still holds. In the crowd sat Marcus, now 16, who'd requested a spot in the audience after months of writing letters to Fleet Command, asking questions about the operators who'd saved his life. He never learned their names. He never needed to. What he carried instead was something steadier, a certainty that had settled into him the moment those doors blew open on Meridian Station and never quite left since. Dylan, back home, still told his version of the story at every opportunity, though these days it came with a quieter ending than it used to, less about the fear and more about the moment he saw movement behind that vent and understood, with total certainty, exactly what it meant. Commander Jake Reyna and the Talon Group moved on to the next assignment, the next quiet crisis unfolding somewhere else in the galaxy, ready the same way they always were, prepared long before anyone else even realized preparation was necessary. High Marshal Vec Orson, in a private moment years later, reportedly told a junior officer the one lesson Meridian Station had permanently burned into Korath military doctrine, a lesson that eventually spread, faction by faction, world by world, until it became something close to universal wisdom across known space. Humanity didn't threaten. Humanity didn't posture. Humanity built the response before the crisis ever happened, and waited, patient and silent, for anyone foolish enough to test it. 17 minutes was all it ever took. And out among the stars, in every quiet corner where someone once considered testing that patience again. The memory of those 17 minutes remained exactly where humanity wanted it. A promise, not a threat, kept in full view of a galaxy that would never forget watching it happen, because that was always the real lesson underneath the story, the one that outlasted every headline and every retelling. Humanity never needed to be the loudest voice in the room, never needed to posture or threaten or perform strength for an audience. They simply built the answer long before anyone asked the question, and when the moment came, they didn't hesitate. 17 minutes proved that. The galaxy never forgot it.